Page 2 now, declaring a state of emergency at the border. This is long, long overdue. For decades, border agents have been fighting a war, and it has been a losing battle. There is simply not enough border agents to keep up with the relentless attacks of humanity on our sovereignty. 20,000 total border agents, but only 5,000 per shift. 2,000 miles of border, 1,000 aliens a day apprehended. Those are the illegals that are arrested. How many more get away? How many more illegals breach our border and then run amok in our neighborhoods? The Border Patrol says multiply that number by 3 or 4, and that means more than 1 million. More than 1 million illegals violate our border and corrupt our society each year. It must be stopped. And a wall is an important tool in achieving that goal. Joining me now from Southern California, producer for One America News, Eddie McCoven. Eddie, I think I'm going to make a prognostication here, a little prediction, that by this time next week, I think we will be looking at a declaration of emergency at the border. And of course, to a certain degree, all hell is going to break loose from a legal perspective and from a political perspective. But I think that's where we are headed. Unless, of course, Nancy is able to blink through all of that plastic surgery of hers.
Well, Graham, that's right. I think we probably will eventually see an executive order issued about building the border barrier. But the president said his preferred route is to go through Congress. But like I said, if he can't get a deal with lawmakers to fund the border barrier, he could declare that national emergency in order to get it done.
If for any reason we don't get this going and they're not going to act responsibly and they don't mind death and crime and all of the problems that they cause by not having a barrier, then you will see what happens with national emergency, which I can do very easily, and there's no question it holds up.
President Trump stood firm in his resolve to secure the nation's southern border during a visit with U.S. Customs and Border Protection and military officials this week, once again saying he could declare a national emergency to build the border barrier. And declaring the emergency could be done by the stroke of a pen. The National Emergencies Act, passed by Congress and signed by President Ford in 1976, solidifies the president's ability to declare an emergency. Under the act, the president can declare a national emergency by executive order, but the president must state their intentions, specifically which powers they plan to use. Congress must be made aware of the financial costs associated with a national emergency, and Congress also has the power to end the emergency, but cannot do so without the president's approval. Other presidents have made use of the National Emergencies Act.
When President Carter totally screwed up the world by welcoming the Ayatollah Khomeini into Iran as a man of peace, and after which millions have died or suffered because of what Carter did, he declared a national emergency when our embassy was attacked. There were 51 American lives taken hostage.
Well, now, President Carter was the first to use the National Emergencies Act. There have been 6 additional national emergencies declared since then.
Now, I don't want to blow our own horn, but I'm going to blow it a little bit here. And this program has been calling for the president to declare a national emergency at the border for many, it's been a couple years at least. I think even during the Obama administration we alluded to it, but we knew he would never do it. That said, this is kind of a historical moment in this country right now. It's a paradigm moment, and I think the President of the United States understands that. I'm not so sure that the Republican leadership understands it, but the bottom line is this may be a once-in-a-lifetime shot to get permanent border solutions down at our very, very vulnerable southern tip. And this can be done, as you mentioned, through executive order. It'll be challenged, of course. We know it's going to be legally challenged. But once he issues the executive order, there must also be some specifics involved here, correct, in terms of how exactly he's going to use the law lawfully to execute this, right?
Well, that's right, Graham. The president has to say clearly, specifically in that order, what's going on, identify the problem. We know what that is, but he's got to put it out in writing. And then he's got to say what he's going to do. And that could be a number of things, such as invoking Title 10 of the United States Code, which allows him to exempt national defense contracts from competitive bidding. In other words, find somebody to build it and have them build it without the competitive bidding process. Also allows Title 50, enabling the president to make national defense contracts outside of otherwise applicable rules, and Title 40, regulating federal property purchases.
Right, and those are all applicable here, right? I mean, you're going to have to purchase the property, eminent domain, whatever, down along the border. Now, after 6 months, the way I understand it, the Congress can move, and you know that a Democrat-controlled House of Representatives will move to terminate the declaration of emergency, but there are two problems with that under the current circumstances. Number one is the United States Senate, although you never know with the folks in there. And number two is that the president would also have to sign off on that, right? So effectively, he could veto it.
That's correct, Ram. As the Emergencies Act is written, it says that 90 days after every 6-month term that the emergency is declared. Now, the White House is going to have to present some numbers to Congress, how much the emergency is costing. At that time, too, the Congress can move. Both houses have to move to keep the emergency going. And, of course, with the Democrats, like you said, we're probably going to see a move to terminate. Republicans in the Senate could choose to block it. Ultimately, it has to go to the president like any other law. And yes, he could veto it, send it back to the Congress. They may or may not be able to override that veto.
And the question becomes monies. You know, how do you fund something like this? Well, disaster aid has been suggested. I think a little bit here, a little bit there. I say drain the entire budgets for the Department of Energy, Department of Education. Just use all that money. If I could wave a magic wand, that's what I would do, because I don't think we need those departments at the federal level. Bottom line is you can take a little bit here, a little bit there, and get this thing done. And just watch how Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer will squeal that somehow this is an impeachable offense when it is completely constitutional and completely lawful. This ought to be fun. Eddie, thanks.